All right, another totally rewarding chats. The middle of winter in all places that we have on here. Paul has joined me where it is colder there, I think. And Paul, is that a background you have?
Now you're going to point out every week that it's no
Every
longer
week?
my insane asylum. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank
Just so you know, Anita, I pointed out, I don't know if it was 1 or 2 episodes ago, that Paul had a background instead of this plain whiteboard, and it'd been like 3 episodes prior. So
it was like the podcast version of not noticing your wife has gotten a haircut, right? Like, and I'm that guy who will not notice that. Oh, wow, your hair's shorter. Oh, yeah, that was 2 weeks ago. Like, that's what Sean did to me. Like, oh, you've got a nice background. Yeah, for
your
a
wife
month.
told me to do that, Paul, to be like, how's it feel? That's what it was for. We have Anita Lettink here. Great to have you. And where are you? Just so people know, so I don't get it wrong. Where exactly are you?
I'm in the Netherlands, just outside of Amsterdam.
Okay. And for those who don't know Anita, I'll plug before. We'll post all her stuff in there. She is definitely one of the long-standing, because you were on the train early, of the EUPTD and everything that has to do with pay equity and transparency. But so that I don't screw it up from there, and I'm not even going to let Paul try either, can you give us your kind of bio and background?
Yeah, of course. About 25 years ago by now, I landed in HR and payroll by accident. I was an engineer, designed network infrastructures and all of that good stuff. Switched to an HR and payroll company and was fascinated with all of the differences that I discovered in all of these countries with local laws and legislation and procedures and policies. Never left. Worked for a large international company for quite a while. And then about 5 years ago, I left, became an independent, and currently spend my time between keynotes about the future of work, advising companies on payroll, but also on other HR tech, and of course, the payroll transparency initiative. And I also work with a number of HR tech vendors where I typically do things like strategy, product strategy, and that.
Add to our list. I think, what are we at? 1 or 2 people, Paul, who literally in school were like, I want to be in comp. So this is one from the engineering side. So it is interesting. I think we're going to have to create a diagram or something at some point of where everyone came from. And actually, the soundbite I'd love to take completely out of context, of course, would be, and I never got out. You made it sound like I just couldn't escape.
That's an aspiration you've yet to fulfill.
And give us a hobby. What do you do? What do you do for fun when you're not talking about this stuff?
I run a lot. Maybe you guys have seen that because sometimes I post about that. I also do a lot of reading, and I'm on the board of a university for applied sciences here in the Netherlands. So I also spend time there listening to lectures and stuff, which is a way, or watching what students are building, which is fascinating.
I'm curious. I'm not a runner, but my wife is, and she can't listen while running, right? So if you're a reader and a runner, my logical conclusion is, well, do you listen to audiobooks when you run? But I'm finding there's a lot of people that say no, like I keep those two separate. So where do you land on that? Do you listen while you run, or do you need something different while you run?
No, I'm firmly in the no tech running business.
There we go.
So while I sometimes bring my phone, I typically don't.
Yep.
All right. There you go.
Yep.
It's funny, Paul. I bring my phone and headphones with me every run, and I probably listen to music. I don't listen to podcasts. I'm not with that. Maybe 1% of the time.
So I'm the opposite. When I'm working out, I want something to sort of focus on. So it's just, I didn't realize there was such variety in that perspective. But like I learn best, I think, when the muscles are activated. So it's an interesting differences amongst us all, right? I'm also less serious of an athlete than probably either of you are. So maybe that comes to show in my conditioning.
You should not take anything like this too seriously, because then all the fun disappears.
Yeah,
so
totally.
For me, running is to relax and to clear my mind, and that is why I don't wear headphones or anything. It's just getting in the zone. And
which is why, if I want to be miserable and have that stuff, Paul, I just go back to work. That's why I say. That's why I'm with Anita. It's a way to get away.
I love listening to you, Sean. So why wouldn't I do that when I'm enjoying myself?
No one should be doing that while they run. They should just enjoy their run. So 5 quick questions for you. You ready?
I am.
Are you a tea or coffee person?
Coffee.
Okay. Are you a coffee snob? That's now the follow-up.
No. Okay. I just drink coffee. Yes.
Country you think has the toughest laws around pay equity transparency that have been published to date? What's your opinion?
Well, maybe you saw my LinkedIn post of this morning. 0 countries have published their final legislation out of 27 in the EU. So I can't answer that question yet.
Trick question, Sean. Trick question.
You can't fool her. You have a weekend, and this has become probably the most important question.
Okay.
The last one. You have a weekend away. Would you rather spend it at a posh resort or out in the woods camping?
As long as it's warm, I don't care.
That's a new response. So we've heard like city versus country. We've heard sort of the choice between the resort and the camping. I don't think we've heard a strong weather preference yet.
A strong depending on weather. We've heard the beach thing, which is always
That's true.
Thing. I've had a lot of people who are like, just get me to the beach and I'll take what you give me to get there.
Which implies warm. I mean, most people don't go to the beach.
Beach. Yeah. I mean, I'll take the beach. No problem.
Problem solved. Favorite or race you'd like to run that you haven't run yet?
I never run a race. I did 2. Hated all the people, but I mean, not personally, but it was so crowded.
Take that out of context, by the way.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
People.
It was so crowded that I decided never to run a race again.
Okay. I did not see that coming. See, I thought it was smart having a running question in there. I'll plug, there are a lot of small local kind of cool running races in cool locations. I look at them as like less that feel of a big event, that jam, and more of a supported, I don't have to bring my crap.
Yeah, but the problem is that
run the floor and see it.
Yeah, but the problem is everyone starts in blocks. And so there's like 50 or 100 people around you and everyone's trying to get ahead of you. And I run for fun. I don't need all of that. So no.
So the soundbite for the day, just before we get to the last question is, Anita wants to make sure we have pay equity and transparency for all the people she doesn't like to be around. That's what we've gotten to now. She doesn't like people, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be paid equitably.
Everyone should be paid equitably. Yes. Okay. Does not matter whether I like them or not. Everyone should. Yes.
And the last one, always interesting with international people. We asked the question, are you a crunchy or creamy peanut butter preference?
Crunchy.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
So are you a peanut butter consumer?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. So you might be the first one, because where this has gotten interesting has been, it's not as prevalent outside the U.S. And so a lot of times they're like, I actually don't care. I just don't eat it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we have peanut butter and like variety. So yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm actually planning a post about why do we always pick on peanut butter? Because it seems like that's what comp people talk about all the time, the peanut butter spread, right? PayScale just published a report that refers to sort of the peanut butter spread. Like, why is it always peanut butter? Particularly since more than half of the people in this world don't really understand that metaphor, right? Like, we should pick on something else. Like, we need to find something else that implies sort of even spread.
Good or bad? Because, if it's going to be good, more like a Nutella thing.
Right, but is peanut butter good or bad, right? It doesn't have an inherent goodness, right? So I don't know. We need a new metaphor.
I would say it's healthy. I mean, in moderation, but yeah, peanut butter is
moderation healthy. That's going to get me.
Yeah. Sean doesn't know moderation around peanut butter.
Yeah. So
welcome to The Human Role, your go-to podcast where HR and payroll collide with innovation. I'm your host, Tiana Neal, and every month I'm diving deep with industry experts and change makers, bringing you real talk insights, practical tips, and fresh takes you won't hear anywhere else. Whether you're a leader, practitioner, or just curious about the latest HR and payroll trends, I've got you covered. Ready to roll with the best? Tune in for fresh perspectives, actionable tips, and the knowledge you need to roll forward with confidence. Subscribe now and let's transform the way you work.
Well, just to open the floor to you and get you going wherever this is going to go is we're a few months out from what theoretically is the deadline. And so give us your high level overview of the state of the EU PTD and where things are at interestingly with your comment earlier, both from a legislative standpoint, but also where companies are in their journey.
I think if you look at legislation, the directive is extremely clear. And so I have been recommending clients to start early and to simply read the directive and follow the requirements that are posted in there. Because yes, you will still need to learn about fines and reporting mechanisms and, what is the institution where you sent your reports to. But the directive is really clear on the basics, on what you need to do, what you need to include, what you need to communicate to candidates and employees, and when you need to do that, and also what the pay gap is allowed to be, 5%, not more. Most HR or comp functions that I know can easily work with that to create their pay transparency strategy. And then once legislation finally comes out, hopefully within the next couple of months, you can adjust, because remember that reporting does not, theoretically, you have until June 7th of next year for your first reports. And so you have a little time for that. But all of the internal stuff, like job architectures, levels, salary bands, but also your internal existing gender pay gaps, you need to have all of that in place and communicate it to your people before June 7th of 2026, or as of June 7th of 2026.
When you said that out loud, my first thought is like, are we going to create some betting odds on how many countries don't have their legislation out before the deadline is actually to start, which is kind of a weird, like, it's hard to actually fathom that could, I think it's definitely going to be some.
Well, there's going to be one, and I'm very embarrassed to say it's the Netherlands. They published the draft legislation earlier in 2025. And then towards the end of 2025, it was announced that they would postpone the final version. And therefore, the directive in the Netherlands would not go into effect until January 1st of 2027. Immediately, one of the members of the EU Parliament, who was a sponsor for the directive, raised it with the European Committee. And in November or December, don't know, but a couple of weeks later, a letter was published stating that no country was allowed to extend the deadline, and countries that would do so would be, there would be consequences. I don't know what that exactly means. I've heard that, you sort of are it's officially announced that you are in breach. But then there's always a period of time that you get to repair all of that. So before anything really happens, we're 2 years down the road. In other words, there are no real consequences if you catch up within 6 months. It just is not a good look from my perspective.
Yeah.
But who knows? The Netherlands is the first one. Like I published this morning, there are 3 countries that have something partially in place. So they did bits and pieces, but not all of it. There are 9 countries, including those 3, that have published a draft. And in these 9 countries, there's also the Netherlands that will not come out with a final version until later this year. 27 minus 9 means that 18 still have
we just don't know where they're at.
Yeah. And keep in mind that in those 18, there's all the big countries like Germany, France, Spain, Italy, countries with a lot of employees, a lot of companies, a lot of workers. So yeah, interesting times here in Europe.
Do you see? My next question was kind of going to be, where do you see companies in that journey to doing what they have to do?
Yeah.
But have you seen them feel less or more of a sense of urgency? Because technically the date's coming, but the government's not in any hurry. So are they in any hurry? Like from a company perspective, that legislative side, how do you see it going?
Well, as a company, there's two things. On the one hand side, you have to work according to the law. And on the other hand side, you have to be a good employer. You have a reputation to uphold. It's really bad if by June you have to go out to your people and say, well, sorry, we knew this was coming. We had 3 years to get here. And yeah, well, we sort of ignored that. And now we're not done. Not a good look. On the other hand, also keep in mind that a lot of European workers are subject to what we call collective labor agreements. And in collective labor agreements, you very often already have like job architectures, job levels, and salary bands. And so it isn't as bad as it looks, because you could think that no company has done this. But I think also from my work with global companies like multinationals, they have had job architectures and formal descriptions and salary bands for years. And so for them, it's more a matter of making sure that the pay gaps do not exceed 5%. And so all their work is probably currently focused on understanding if they have any pay gaps, potentially repairing them before they actually have to communicate to employees. And that it's still difficult, but it's not as time consuming as putting in place job architectures and descriptions and levels and salary bands. Because remember, all of that, if you have like larger companies, is also subject to approval from works councils because it directly influences salaries. And those things take time.
Yeah.
So my guess is that it will be more difficult. We'll see more gaps and more problems in the somewhat smaller companies. Let's say below 1,000 employees than anything above.
I think the other comment I make a lot on this is, while a collective agreement or other existence of structures simplifies the sting of what you communicate, people kind of know what the pay structure is. Yes. They probably know where they fall. So it's less about the risk of what you're saying. It does not change the fact that you probably have to say it in a different way than you said it before, right? The right to information, Article 7 requirements, I think that's the smack upside the head for most companies. Even if you have confidence that there's equity in your structure, you still have to have an operational process to answer the question. Yes. And collective agreements probably haven't specified that in the past. Like, what is the form of it? How fast do you turn it around? Can I ask for one every single day? Or do I have to have all of the rules around how will that work? Like, there's no reason to wait. And it doesn't matter what kind of a workforce you have. That's still a requirement too. So I think we forget a lot about that's probably the harder operational point than the actual what it says. It's how you're going to say it is a key part that a lot of organizations are really.
I think that's the hardest part, Paul. I think that Article 7 is one you and I keep coming back to. That piece of it is how are companies going to deal with it? Because on the other stuff, you're in control. I do the reporting. I gather the data. I do whatever. I run it. Your merit cycle is your merit cycle, unless you want to get outside the box and say we were a shitty payer before. So we're catching you up like you do it during the merit cycle. But this whole you and I both, and I'd be curious, Anita, your take, I prognosticate a lot of work because in theory, they're going to all come out because I have right to information. Who in their right mind isn't going to grab it? And then every time there's someone changes, and this is where how often and how many times can you do it? They're not going to, I don't think it's going to be in the initial legislation. It's every time there's a change in headcount, I'm going to go ask because Paul just got hired. I'm going to keep my last 3 and I'm going to see now how much Paul makes by default, even though I'm getting men, women, and me. I can do the math. Yeah. So how do you see, I see that as the heaviest lift. Do you see that as the heaviest lift, or what do you see companies fretting the most about?
I'm not seeing a lot of anxiety around this because once you have this into place, you can deal with it. And the directive also does not say that, when a person asks, you need to deliver this the next day. And you have a couple of weeks. I think it's 8 weeks or so, 2 months, 3 months, whatever.
Except for Poland. But
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And so it will be interesting to see what comes out in the national legislations and what they say about how often can you ask once a year? Can you ask whenever someone new enters your team? It's going to be a little bit of a nightmare. For now, what I consider the most pressing issue is making sure that managers are fully equipped to communicate with employees on these topics. Because you can do like corporate communication all you want, and you can put your CEO out there to explain to everyone that, yes, now we have pay transparency, but he or she is not going to answer employee questions that are very personal in nature. Like, how does my salary compare to that of my coworkers? And why am I in the second quartile and the person that sits next to me is in the fourth? How does that work? And that means that managers, much more than in the past, must justify the decisions that they have made. But this was a really interesting one that I was talking to about with someone yesterday, is that they also have to justify the decisions that their predecessors made. Because you end up with a certain comp and ben package because of all kinds of decisions, and not necessarily because your current manager thinks that is, that puts you in the right place, or that they agree with the decisions that have been made in the past. So this is super interesting, and most managers currently don't have the vocabulary to talk about that, or the justifications to clearly explain it in such a way that they can, explain it to each and every employee in their team in the exact same way. And then that also the manager that sits next to them, continues on that thread, because if there is light between explanations, you can be sure that employees will find it and they will come back at you. And so in all of this, the risk to lose trust is front and center. And if companies do not understand that or do not plan for that, then we're going to have a very interesting second half of the year. And we're going to see a lot of people out there in the job market, simply because we can say all we want about pay and benefits and compensation and plans and careers. But ultimately, people always look at, at their salary. What do I take home? And is that fair? We're going to learn it.
I always tell people, they're like, well, it's not always about salary. And I'm like, well, take any part of their salary away and you'll find out how quick it is. None of them are.
You know what the interesting thing is? When most people don't realize this, but I often, when I do keynotes, I ask the audience, so why do people come and work for you? And then they talk about our reputation, and we have great career paths and our learning and development and blah, blah. And at the end of the day, yes, that's all good. But when I have 2 contracts and 2 job offers, and I'm sitting at home with my partner and we're looking at, what am I going to do? What am I going to choose? The package, the best compensation package always wins.
The numbers on the table. That's for sure.
That. And the interesting thing is that flips the next day, because as soon as I've signed, as soon as I've joined the company, that doesn't matter so much anymore, because now I know that for the next 6 or 12 months, this is a given. And suddenly all those other items take over and move into first and second and third place. It's a really interesting dynamic that a lot of people don't realize happens. But, we can talk about it for a very long time. But in the end, pay and compensation, the whole plan, that is the deciding factor. It's as simple as that.
I put it similar a lot of times, Anita. Add up all the extra things you do at work and all the amazing stuff you do, and don't give them base pay. Are they showing up? They're there for base pay. So like that's, the total package, whatever, but that's what they do. Very few there, I'm sure there are some people that, go to work for the pure love of the job. And I would argue, those are fewer and farther between than people, no cash, no show up.
That is a really nice attitude, but it's strictly for people who have passed a certain level of pay, right? If you don't have to worry about your bills, then this is what you can do. But as long as you need all of that to pay your bills and, your cost of living and everything, then you do not have the luxury to look at your job like that. And a lot of us don't have that. It's as simple as that.
Well, circling back to your comment on the managers, do you see that there might be companies who are like, actually don't talk about it, managers, because it's too hard. You only do it once. You're like, actually go to jokingly who has, all the time in the world, the HR and comp department, and they'll explain it to you every time. So I do think there's going to be a point at which you try to operationalize as much as you can. And there is an opportunity with Article 7 to be like, hey, people are going to come ask for this. Here's your opportunity to explain it consistently. But do you think, how do you think they're going to tackle that? Because I think people have assumed that the managers will be making that discussion. Do you think that's going to happen, or how do you see that shifting?
I have not seen it shift in any of the companies that I have worked with. Everyone is fully focused on making sure that, managers can do this. But keep in mind, I typically work with the somewhat larger companies where it will be impossible for HR and comp teams to fund all of these questions.
Yeah.
What I do see is that they are pretty much focused on making sure that, there is a talk track, making sure that there are things like FAQs that are available to both employees and managers, so that when there are some gray areas, people can revert to these documents and read up on whatever it is. And I think also that they are very keen on establishing, yes, this is the one source of truth. And so if your manager tells you something different, yes, I'm sorry, but go back to, what we are putting, what we are putting out there. In smaller companies, I could see let's say the under 250 maybe or so, that HR people say, well, we'll do it for you. But still, I fundamentally feel or am of the opinion that managers, this is why we have them. They also after this directive goes into effect, they will still be responsible for performance conversations. And performance conversations typically lead to some sort of financial change, whatever it is. So if they don't understand this whole situation, how can they then make financial decisions for their employees in future? I don't see how that can happen.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with a really big employer, about 120,000 people. I think 30,000 of them are in EU member states. And I think it was 2,000 managers in EU member states. And their whole discussion was, oh my gosh, there's no way these 2,000 people are going to do this well. And the realization is, well, yes, there's going to be some mistakes. We know that. And I thought they landed on kind of an elegant strategy, which is let's centralize as much of the compliance as possible. Let's make sure we're giving the right tools. We are answering the questions in a legally compliant way. That's a central experience. We're not just going to say, manager, when somebody asks, you've got to figure out what to say. No, we're going to produce the page, essentially, that is fully compliant. But we know that that's not going to stop the questions. It is impossible to not have a conversation between the manager and the employee. So it's the enablement of managers for them is becoming less about the specifics and more about the context, right? So it's not make sure you say this, don't say that, because they're going to get it wrong anyway. It's more about explain why this might be the case. Explain how you've thought about changes when you've played a role in changes. Mm-hmm. Explain how you believe other managers have done it when you have to defend it, to your point. So it's like, it was an interesting kind of 1-2 step on, we know we can't just, and you're not suggesting this, but we can't just send managers to the wolves and say, we've trained you, do all the work. Like, that's not the answer, right? It's like, you got to start with a compliant baseline, but they play a critical role in delivering the message and responding to the questions that will come. Like, there is no way that there won't be questions. So it's a mistake if you assume you can fully centralize. You have to have manager involvement in some case, because that's where the relationship lives, to your exact point.
It is. I mean, I think, Paul, like we've talked about, like I still think there's other bonuses because it lives there, the relationship, and pay really functionally only changes a couple times a year. That centralizing it and sending them to comp helps, because if I send them to you, Paul, they just don't like you. I have to work with you. I have to work with you for 364 days a year, right? The rest of the time. I also, like, I'm curious. I'm very curious how that part's all going to shake out, because most people, when they're hired, I mean, think about it. Even when you're hired in HR, do they ask you how you communicate bonus and base? And, even in comp, they don't ask how you handle comp planning. And most managers in the company were hired to be really good at something else. This is legitimately not anywhere near there. And so will people not be able to manage because of this? Will you take not the best managers and not move them to management, which the business suffers? Like, there's some ramifications due to the risk of the communication by not having it centralized. Because obviously, we say it could be bad, but it could be legally bad. Like, someone's like, like, that's like, there's bad. And then there's like, oh shit, bad, we're going to court bad. And so, like, do you take that off the table? And so I'm really curious what the precedents come out with this stuff, because it is, to your point, Paul, it's like, when you think about 3 or 4 people, you're like, hey, let's have a meeting and talk about how you communicate this. You just said 2,000 people. Well, we're not getting that's a big table. And you can't even communicate that really well with one person, probably. So, like, think about multiple communicators. Like, I think it's a really interesting challenge, this whole communications piece, more than the job arc. I think it was a great point you made, Anita. Like, a lot of people have job architecture, or, to be honest, even 250 to 500 person shops are probably not far. Like, they've thought about it.
Right.
So, like, that walk actually is probably not as big as people thought. The math thing, like, whatever, it's math, right? Like, you could find someone to do it. I think this piece that you've highlighted, Anita, is the most critical piece on this communication piece. And, not all jobs in management were hired to be good communicators, right? I come from the development side of the house in general. I can guarantee not all managers were great communicators.
Well, and the problem is managers are employees too, right? So, like, their own context shapes a ton of how they communicate about it, right? Managers who are happy with their pay communicate about pay very differently, and actually quantified this at one of my companies. Like, we looked at where was the market position of the leader and what did their people feel about their pay. We surveyed after the merit process, and, like, people felt better when the manager was paid well, regardless of how they were paid, right? Because it's just a tone that comes through. There was a confidence, I think, is really what it was. And what we heard anecdotally was, like, the negative sentiment disappeared, right? So if a manager feels disrespected, underpaid, not paid fairly, those words are going to come out in some form or another when they're communicating with an employee, and it pees in the pool, for lack of a better word. Like, it poisons the circumstance, right? Whereas if you're well paid, you're more likely to follow the script. You're on board. So it was a huge difference. Now, I'm not advocating pay all your managers more, but, like, that's the reality of, like, the manager is a human, and that human has to communicate this outcome. Yeah. And you can't ask them to completely disconnect their brain when they're doing that, right? They're still going to be themselves. I even think a subtle comment. I mean, now that you say that, Paul, I hadn't thought about it. Even a subtle comment, like, I feel your pain, Paul. Like that totally is an interesting, like, that signals you agree, right? Yeah. And it's like, oh, well, my manager agrees that I'm underpaid, right? Like, whereas somebody who's well paid is likely to say something, I don't know, different. I don't know what it is. We didn't like spy on people, but we could quantify a difference in sentiment from those who are being led by somebody who we believe was more confident about their pay. So humans are hard, and it's just an evidence point that humans are hard.
Well, that's what I think you've heard me say, Paul, a bunch. I think humans are highly statistically predictable, but individually unique. And so you put them on, they'll fall on a bell curve for most stuff. But then, of course, you have individual problems everywhere. Summing it all, kind of, I need to bring it all back. Where if you're a company and you're like, a few months out from this and looking at things, what are the 2 or 3 things you think just either have to be started right now or should be in place right now so they don't feel like they're behind?
What I always recommend that people do is don't wait until all of your data is perfect. Because,
you're going to be waiting a while.
Amen.
You'll be waiting a long time for that magical day to come.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, you need a lot of data and it comes from different sources. And if you are going to wait until you have all of that before you run your first report, you're probably too late. It's as simple as that. And so start running the reports. Excuse me, because you will start to understand what you are measuring.
Yeah. I know why you're doing that. I would say that, the same thing. I think not only understanding what you're measuring, but you'll actually find out where your data is just wrong so much easier when you run the report and you're like, we ran tenure and everyone was hired at, May 1st, 2019. Coincide with our new,
new system launch.
And so you don't find that without going through and to your point, don't wait for perfect is really a great place to start and figure it out from there.
Yeah, but also you need to, these are not insights or dashboards that you have a lot of experience with. And most companies are starting to do this now. And that also means that there's a learning curve for comp and ben people to understand what they're looking at and where deviations signal that you must dig deeper, and where deviations are part of normal salary histories or normal, performance processes as outcomes. And so you can ignore them. And if you don't have that experience in the beginning, everything is a flag. Yeah. And after a little while, you can ignore 90% of the flags and you understand exactly.
Yeah.
Which flags are red flags.
It's true, especially some of the tech systems that have been built for this. It's literally a red flag, and your fight or flight response ticks up a little bit. And actually, a member of my team was just working with a client in their tech environment and kind of lost sight of the fact, you realize you're looking at a group that has 40 people in it, and there's only 2 men. It's all women. You have to interpret the data differently when that happens, right? But the alarm bell of there's a red flag. What are we going to do? Let's start slow down, go through your methodology, make sure it's a valid group. Let's look at composition. Now let's look at sort of controls and predictive fact. That's a muscle that has to be built if you're not used to diagnosing in that way. Totally agree.
So with all that stuff in mind, that's all. Is there any last comment on the pay equity side? Because I have then the general HR question I like to ask, but is there any last something I might have missed or words of advice?
I think we've covered quite a bit, and my words of advice would be start. Do not wait. Yeah, it's as simple as that.
Already. So if you don't start, just get started. I'm 100% on that.
Yeah. Don't wait for the government to tell you what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. At a minimum, the gap when they get it'll be much easier to close the gap if half the equation you completely understand. Yeah. That's been my take has been, why wait to start doing the work? Because you're going to have to do some math. You might as well at least know half of the equation. The other side's and to your point, actually, I think I'll highlight the one thing before I ask the last question that you mentioned earlier. The guidelines are all pretty consistent and they seem that they'll all play inside of there. So it's not like you're waiting for a 2% number or a 10% number or whatever. You're kind of waiting on minute detail. You're not waiting on the general guidance of what you're going to have to do. So I think that's the other piece. People are kind of hanging on that, to your point, which you highlighted kind of subtly earlier. It's going to be about there. About what the answer is. It's not going to deviate a ton.
Exactly.
So if you could solve any one thing in all of HR automagically, we use a high-tech term, what would it be?
I don't know if I would solve anything, but I would wish for something. And my wish for HR is more time. And there's a very simple reason for that. I think with everything that is coming towards, HR, the function, also comp and ben teams and external changes, we need some time to take a step back and really think about the function that we want to be for the 2030s. And you need some time to understand what is important for your company and what might not be important for your company. As example, when I look at the demographic changes that are coming towards us or hurtling towards us in Europe, people really need to understand what that means for their companies and how they can respond. So I would wish for time.
That's great.
When you find a way to create that, you let us know, because
well, I always say if I could invent more time or a time machine, I can tell you where I'm not going to be with HR.
There's a different career path in your future when you've actually figured out.
Yeah. But I will say, like, that is a really cool, and actually just the message from there that I take is like, it's looking at your numbers now and pay equity, and you have to do that and tying it to pay equity and workforce analysis. But like, what is the potential of what's coming? Because it isn't going to be a consistent workforce flow that's coming. It's fundamentally changing. So that's a really cool message. So folks that are listening, we will have Anita stuff on there. I don't always say this with everyone. Maybe I should, but you definitely need to follow Anita. Your postings, the information, the whatever. I'll sound like a complete techno dork and say there's a lot of really cool information about everything that's going on. And it's usually summed up so that, to be honest, even I understand what's going on, which says a lot, Anita, about your ability to cull it down to something that everybody can understand, which is super appreciated. And it is done really, really well. So we'll post that information out. I really appreciate you coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul, Sean. It was lovely to speak to you today.
Yeah, thanks,
and
Anita.
Then what we'll do, Anita, if we're ever together, is we'll make Paul come run with us.
You don't want to see that. Good. It's not. It's not a pretty
two
sight.
People I can handle.
Yeah.
You 100% want to see it. I'm putting odds that it happens at less than 0.
Pretty small. And now I know where to not travel to avoid it, right?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anita.
Thank you, Anita.
You're welcome. Bye.